above Iran.
Out of interest, Professor.
You owe us.
Out of interest.
You owe us.
Out of interest, do you think women should have freedom to dress how they wish?
That is not your concern.
I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question.
That is not your concern.
Do you have an answer for me or not?
Women should have a freedom to dress within the cultural context of every society. Women and men.
Professor Marandi called Piers Morgan an advocate for the devil. Piers said, "Great, the devil's next guest is coming up." That is how this interview ends. And somehow that is not even the most revealing moment in it. Subscribe and let us get into it.
Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. Professor, thank you for coming back on Uncensored. First of all, your reaction to the death of the president yesterday.
Obviously, everyone that I know is in mourning. He was a very popular figure. He was a very humble person, very different from the description that you gave. He worked very hard for the deprived, the working class, the disenfranchised. He traveled from city to city, from town to town. He was constantly visiting the different provinces. And that's why he was so popular among, especially, as I said, the more disenfranchised and middle class, lower middle class Iranians.
I mean, you've painted what many would view as a ridiculous picture of a man dubbed the Butcher of Tehran, somebody whose death was greeted by many women posting images of themselves celebrating his death because of the appalling suppression that he put them under. And we know that he was responsible for the deaths of many thousands of political prisoners. So I don't quite categorize him as the person that you're trying to describe to us.
Well, obviously, what you're saying is inaccurate, to say the least. I would say the butchers are in London, in Washington, the people who destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen during the disgraceful genocide there, the dirty war in Syria, the destruction of Libya, the sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba. I think that the real monsters are actually much more closer to home. He was a part of the judiciary, and those people that you were saying were executed were. He wasn't executing people. He was in the judiciary at the time, and the people who you're alluding to, and the numbers are far less than what you claim, they're actually, this is something that your government should be ashamed of. These are people who fought against Iran. They fought for Saddam Hussein as foot soldiers. They betrayed the country. They carried out bomb attacks in this country, killing up to 17,000 people, including a president, a prime minister, and a head of judiciary. A bomb explosion near my house when I was a school student, and I was getting ready to go to school. It killed 9 to 11 people, including an Armenian family of 4. These are the people who you're saying they were murdered by Iranians. No, in Iran, no one has any sympathy for the MEK terrorist organization, which today has a major base in Albania, and it has offices across Europe and North America. So it is your government that's supporting terrorism. It is your government and your governments that are really the brutal regimes that
Professor, you came on and spun this sort of stuff last time with the same smirk that you're doing it with this time. And the reason I find the smirk so irksome is because everybody actually outside of your office right now is looking at this thinking, is this guy for real? Given that Iran's tentacles in terms of terrorism are very transparently flowing through the 3 H's, as I described them, Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas. We know that your country, Iran, through its regime, has been responsible for horrendous terrorism now for a very long time. Why do you expect people watching these interviews, when you do them, to just calmly believe you when you say that all the bad guys are everybody else and the downtrodden, oppressed, much misunderstood people are the Iranian regime that is despised by so many people in Iran itself?
No, and Iran will see during the funeral ceremonies how popular President Raisi was. Just like General Soleimani 4 years ago, people like you were saying the same thing about him. but we saw millions come to the street. Just because in the West you say this sort of thing doesn't mean that that's the reality on the ground over here. Hezbollah was a group that was created as a result of the Israeli regime's invasion of Lebanon. They went and captured the capital in 1982. Hezbollah was created as a result of this illegitimate and brutal occupation. They expelled the brutal apartheid ethno-supremacist regime from Lebanon. And Hamas and other groups in Palestine are the result of 76 years of oppression, ethnic cleansing, and brutality and apartheid from this same regime. So when you speak about the Houthis or Ansar Allah, you're talking about a decade of genocide carried out by the Saudis and the Emiratis, who are your allies, and your governments were supporting them. Your government starved the people of Yemen to bring them to their knees, but you failed, and you failed today as well. So no, you cannot blame the victims. 9/11, we were told that Al-Qaeda carried out the attacks on the Twin Towers. Who was Al-Qaeda? They were working with you in Afghanistan. And then 10 years later in Syria and in Libya, Al-Qaeda was cooperating with you. We have an email from Jake Sullivan, February the 12th, 2012, where he sent to Hillary Clinton, where he said, in Syria, Al-Qaeda is on our side. The dirty war in Syria, the dirty war in Libya is yours. These are your crimes, and you cannot escape from it. So we are the victims, and your ugly empire is guilty as it is guilty in the genocide today in Gaza.
I wonder how many people watching this around the world, and there'll be a lot, will look at the situation with the current Iranian regime and think the word victim is appropriate. And particularly given that President Raisi, that you paint such a idyllic picture of as a human being, somebody who only cared about the downtrodden. This is a man, of course, ordered tighter enforcement of Iran's hijab and chastity law, restricting women's dress and behaviour. It was under those orders that 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was detained in September 2022 by Iran's morality police for wearing improper hijab and died 3 days later in hospital, sparking mass unrest. That doesn't sound like the kind of guy you're trying to describe to me. It sounds like a guy who is trying to dictate to women how they should dress, how they should behave. Do you understand that in the West, we look at that as reprehensible behaviour?
No, in the West, you objectify women, you commodify women, and you sexualize women, and you have Epsteins and many Epsteins who control.
Well, we give women the freedom to dress how they wish. Why would you decline them that freedom?
In Iran, we have women pilots, we have women scientists. My boss at the University of Tehran, the dean of my faculty, is a woman. For the 21 years that I've been an academic at the University of Tehran, 17 and a half of those years, the dean of my faculty was one woman or another. Don't misrepresent Iran. It doesn't work anymore, Piers. Your Western empire is on the decline. The whole of the global South is witnessing the crimes that are being carried out by your regimes. And your declining regimes are now despised by your own people. You're crushing people, students who are protesting genocide. You're not even crushing students who are protesting your own government for something that they're doing at home. You're crushing students for protesting genocide in another country. But you can't tolerate that. And your media is controlled by a group of rich people. They control the narrative, and you call that a democracy. Your choice is either Hillary Clinton or Biden or Trump. And then when that decision is made, the whole of Europe, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand fall in line as good soldiers. You don't have democracies, so don't pretend that you are above Iran.
Out of interest, Professor.
You owe us.
Out of interest.
You owe us.
Out of interest. Do you think women should have freedom to dress how they wish?
That is not your concern.
I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question.
That is not your concern.
Do you have an answer for me or not?
Women should have a freedom to dress within the cultural context of every society. Women and men do not have the freedom to dress any way they like in your country. So different societies have different cultures.
Actually, I can dress how the hell I like.
Well, no, you cannot. You can then take off your clothes right now in front of the camera. Don't talk nonsense.
I can take my clothes off if I wanted to.
Every society has its own culture. We don't follow.
But just to be clear, I mean, you're trying to avoid the question. Just to be clear,
I'm not.
well, just
No, I'm
let me
not.
ask you the question again. You're a smart guy. You're a professor,
No,
and you're full of the ills of the West. Do you think women should be free to dress how they like?
No, I told you. I told you very clearly.
You don't agree?
Women should have the freedom to dress the way they like, but in our culture, the sexualization, objectification, and commodification of women is unacceptable. It is your society that drives and pushes women.
Got
in
it.
that
No,
direction.
I'll get you another lecture about my society. But just to be clear, what you mean is you would like to. You don't think they should, do you?
Women are pilots. Most of my university students are women. The last person who we hired in my department was a woman. I am an affiliate in another department as well at the University of Tehran. The last two people we hired as academics there are women too. You cannot misrepresent Iran.
I simply asked you, Professor, if you felt women should have the freedom to dress how they wish, and you cannot answer me because actually you don't think they should.
No, because I didn't. They should be free to dress as they like within the cultural and religious context.
And just to be clear, just one moment. And just to be clear, okay, you can keep shouting or you can answer my question. Just to be clear, that would be within the realm of Iran's hijab and chastity law, would it?
I don't know the precise law, and I'm not going to get involved in that debate. That's
it was President Raisi who tightened enforcement of that law. So you must be aware of it. You're a professor. You're a very smart guy.
No, actually, I hope you're smart too. Mr. Raisi did not tighten the law, or he didn't enforce it.
You just said you don't know anything about the law.
No, I don't know that.
You either know about it or you don't. Sounds like you're very well informed.
I know you're trying to escape the argument.
Actually, no, I'm just trying to ask you a simple question. The truth is, this guy you're trying to paint as some kind of saint, right, was somebody who led a draconian enforcement of how women in Iran dress, and that led to a young woman who was being detained by your morality police, and because she was wearing an improper hijab, and she died in hospital 3 days later, sparking mass unrest where more people got punished. That's the reality of this utopia you paint in Iran. It's a place that actually, far from encouraging women to be these great champions, as you put it, actually wants to suppress and control them. And that was led by President Raisi. But anyway,
you want to keep talking. You want to keep talking because you want to run out the clock, because we know quite well, and so do you, that your regime and your governments are the ones that are destroying our part of the world. And you're speaking about a law in Iran that most people accept, and that it is part of a different culture than yours.
Yeah.
But you think that our society and all other societies have to behave like yours. And that's not necessarily the case. And you think that necessarily because a woman wears a headscarf, that woman is somehow intellectually less, or that she's oppressed. That's your ignorance. I didn't say that. That is your ignorance.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
But women,
if a woman, let me be very clear to you. If a woman chooses to do that, that's fine. It's the idea of people like you endorsing a law that orders them to dress in a certain way. I find objectionable.
Because in the West, increasingly, women who have hijab are being sidelined. They're losing their jobs, whether it's in France, whether it's in England, and in other parts of Europe. So don't pretend that this is not the case. But in any case, women in Iran, whether they wear a headscarf or not, most of the university students in Iran are women, and women in Iran know how to deal with their rights much better than you. We don't need you, your government, and your filthy.
Is that why they all take to the streets to protest against the regime?
Will see.
Am I imagining things again?
You will see women take to the streets during the funeral, and then I will wonder how are you going to explain that away? Or is it North Korea and how the evil mullahs are forcing people to come to the streets?
There's a lot of that. Yeah, a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what
there is. Yeah, when you have a morality police, you get told what your morals should be and how to behave. That's the point of a morality police. Anyway, we've run out of time. We've run down the clock because I've given you more time than I intended to, Professor.
Just one final point. You have never been to Iran.
No.
You know nothing about Iran.
But I know many people who have.
No, you've never been
And
to
last time
Iran.
you came on this program, you tried to pretend that the regime has the widespread support of Iranian people. It doesn't. It doesn't.
Well,
in fact, it's believed that as many as 80% of Iranian people loathe and despise your totalitarian regime.
In your wild.
Let us start with the yes or no question, because it is the most important exchange in this entire interview, and Marandi never answers it once in 15 minutes of trying. Piers asks a simple question. Should women have the freedom to dress how they wish? It is not a trick question. It is not a loaded question. It is the kind of question that anyone who believes in basic human liberty should be able to answer in one word, and Marandi cannot do it. He pivots to women pilots. He pivots to his female colleagues at the University of Tehran. He pivots to Western objectification of women. He pivots to France banning hijabs. He pivots to Epstein. He pivots to everything except the question. The answer he eventually lands on after multiple attempts is that women should be free to dress within the cultural and religious context of their society, which sounds like a yes until you apply it to Iran, where the cultural and religious context includes a morality police that detained a 22-year-old woman for wearing an improper hijab, and she died in a hospital 3 days later. That is not a cultural context. That is a criminal enforcement apparatus applied to a dress code with lethal consequences. And Marandi knows this, which is why when Piers connects the dots between the answer and the law, Marandi suddenly says he does not know the precise law and does not want to get involved in that debate. The man who will confidently tell you about the crimes of every Western government for 15 minutes straight suddenly does not know the law that the president he just called a humble champion of the working class personally tightened enforcement of. That selective ignorance is the answer to the question he refused to give directly. Mahsa Amini was 22 years old. She was detained by Iran's morality police for wearing an improper hijab. 3 days later, she was dead. The mass protests that followed were met with violence that killed hundreds more. This happened under Raisi. This happened because of a law Raisi enforced. And Marandi's response is that most people in Iran accept the law, and it is part of a different culture. Most people accept it. In a country where the morality police detain women for how they dress, where protesting the law gets you killed, where the internet gets shut down when dissent reaches critical mass, the acceptance that exists in that context is not the same thing as the acceptance that exists in a society where disagreement is permitted. The Butcher of Tehran designation. Let us be precise about this, because Marandi dismisses it as Western propaganda, and it deserves a direct historical accounting. Raisi was a member of the Death Commission in 1988. This is not a Western fabrication. Iranian human rights organisations, survivors, and the families of victims have documented what happened. Thousands of political prisoners, predominantly members of the Mujahideen Halq and leftist organisations, were executed in a matter of months following a fatwa from Khomeini. Raisi was one of 4 officials who sat on the commission that ordered and oversaw those executions in Tehran. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and United Nations Special Rapporteurs have all documented this. The number is disputed, but the event is not. Marandi's counter is that these were MEK members who fought for Saddam Hussein and carried out terrorist attacks inside Iran. Some of that is historically accurate. The MEK did collaborate with Saddam during the Iran-Iraq War and did carry out bombings inside Iran. None of that makes mass extrajudicial executions without trial legal or moral. You do not have to support the MEK to recognise that executing prisoners without due process is a war crime, regardless of what those prisoners did. The whataboutism strategy. This is where Marandi is most effective and most frustrating simultaneously, and it deserves an honest assessment rather than a dismissal. When Marandi says the butchers are in London and Washington, he is not making things up. The Iraq War killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. The intervention in Libya produced a failed state and a slave trade. The dirty war in Syria involved Western support for armed groups, including some with al-Qaeda connections. The Jake Sullivan email from 2012 saying al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria is real. It was published. It is in the public record. Piers does not dispute any of this. He cannot, because it is true. But here is what the whataboutism strategy does that Piers never quite articulates clearly enough. It does not actually defend Iran. It changes the subject. The fact that Western governments have committed serious crimes does not make Iranian state crimes less serious. The fact that Mahsa Amini died in morality police custody is not made better or worse by what happened in Iraq. These are separate moral accounting ledgers, and Marandi treats them as if they are connected. As if the crimes of one side cancel out the crimes of the other. They do not. You can hold both simultaneously. The Iraq War was a catastrophic and arguably criminal enterprise, and Mahsa Amini should not have died for her hijab. Both of those things are true at the same time. The Three Hayes argument is where Marandi actually makes his strongest substantive points, even though Piers never fully engages with them. Hezbollah was created in direct response to the Israeli invasion and occupation of Lebanon in 1982. That is historically accurate. Hamas emerged from decades of occupation, displacement, and the systematic denial of Palestinian political rights. That is historically accurate. The Houthis consolidated power during a period when Saudi Arabia and the UAE were conducting a military campaign in Yemen that produced one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 21st century with Western-supplied weapons and Western logistical support. That is historically accurate. None of this makes these organizations without fault. Hezbollah has committed atrocities. Hamas committed October 7th. The Houthis have fired on civilian shipping and committed human rights abuses in Yemen. But the origin stories Marandi provides are not fabrications. They are the historical context that Western media consistently omits when discussing these groups. And omitting the context does not make the analysis better. It makes it incomplete. The popular support question is the one that genuinely cannot be resolved from the outside. Piers says 80% of Iranians despise the regime. Marandi says watch the funeral and you will see millions in the streets. Both of these things can be partially true simultaneously. Regimes can have genuine bases of support among specific populations while being genuinely despised by other populations. The working class and rural poor that Marandi describes as Raisi's base are real people with real reasons to feel that the Islamic Republic has served them better than the Shah's regime did. The urban educated young women who celebrated Raisi's death are also real people with real reasons for their feelings. Iran is a country of 90 million people, and the idea that any single polling number captures the political reality of a society that complex is itself a simplification. The advocate for the devil line at the end of this interview is the most revealing moment of all, and not for the reason Marandi intended. He calls Piers an advocate for the devil. And what he means is that Piers represents a Western media system that in Marandi's view systematically lies about Iran while covering up Western crimes. There is a version of that critique that has genuine substance. Western media does have blind spots about Western government conduct. The coverage of the Iraq War was largely a failure. The framing of conflicts involving Western allied governments is often more generous than the framing of conflicts involving Western adversary governments. But advocate for the devil as a phrase tells you something about the theological framework through which Marandi and the regime he represents view this conflict. In that framework, the West is not just a geopolitical adversary, it is a satanic force. Great Satan is not a metaphor in Iranian state ideology, it is a genuine theological designation. And when you are fighting the Great Satan, the rules that apply to ordinary political conflicts do not apply, including the rules about women's freedom to dress how they wish. That is the connection Piers never quite makes explicit. The same theological framework that justifies calling America the Great Satan also justifies the morality police, also justifies the execution of prisoners without trial, also justifies shutting down the internet when people protest. Because in a cosmic battle between divine order and satanic corruption, the normal rules of liberal democracy are not just irrelevant. They are part of the corruption. Marandi will never answer the yes or no question about women's freedom to dress how they wish, not because he is evasive, but because within his framework the question itself is illegitimate. Freedom from within a divinely ordered cultural context is not the same thing as freedom, and that gap between those two definitions of freedom is where Mahsa Amini died. Stay locked in. Stay informed. I am Lucas Stoey, and I will see you in the next one.